Search Wizards and Sourcing 7. We have folks from both communities here today. Everybody at Sourcing 7 knows Derek Zeller well. Some of our Search Wizards people do and some don't, but Derek is a longtime, well-known person in our industry. He's a great sourcer, a published poet and author, and someone who's here today to speak about both offline and online social media marketing strategies. And it's my pleasure to turn this over to Derek. And folks, you can type your questions in a chat, and Derek has agreed to spend a little time with us at the end of his presentation to answer your questions. So without further ado, Derek, take it away, my friend.
Hey, Sourcing Maniacs, how is everybody? Thanks for tuning in. If you weren't able to make it and you're listening to it on a recording, I totally understand. And if you have questions from the recording, please feel free to reach out to me via email, LinkedIn, Facebook, if I'm connected with you on there, or you're a sourcer, so find my email. So sourcing through marketing. It's online and offline strategies, and this really should be almost sourcing through inbound marketing, online and offline strategies, because some of this is going to be about inbound, and some of it's going to be about what happened if the internet shut down and you had to actually source by not being on a computer. So why is this not working? There we go. Also, the reason why there's SourceCon up on top there, folks, is I know Sourcing 7's in Seattle, and SourceCon is going to be in Seattle next year in March. So I'm hoping to see everybody there as well. Would be awesome if we could get that. It's going to be great. It's always fun. It's good learning and great participation. So come on out and say hi. So what are you going to hear from me about online marketing techniques and strategies, offline social strategies that actually work by listening, which is a little different for a lot of people, and a few inspirational true stories, hashtag true story from my past. That's what makes it fun. So we all know LinkedIn, right? We all use LinkedIn. If you're not, that's cool. I'm not really a big fan, never really have been, to be honest with you. I do a lot of work on LinkedIn, by posting and so on and so forth, which I'll get to later. But I started looking at profiles of recruiters, because recruiters and sourcers are always sending me profiles. And when I started doing searches, I would find things like this: web developer at Mission Media in Baltimore, Maryland. I was looking for a web developer a long time ago, a couple of years ago when I was back in DC and recruiting. And this came up, and it just made me laugh, because if you look at it, it's web developer. So yes, my Boolean string found me a web developer, but I don't know what this person does other than being a web developer. So are they just doing HTML? Are they doing JavaScript or VBScript or .ASP? Are they doing CSS, custom and sales sheet? I don't know. So I'm like, this is a really bad LinkedIn profile. And if this individual really is actually looking for a job, I would hazard to guess that most good sourcers wouldn't probably send them an email. Or if you even look, the person only has 50 connections. Also, I don't know if who this person is, where they're at, other than they're in the Baltimore, Maryland area. And that's kind of a large area. I mean, are they in PG County? Are they actually in the city of Baltimore? I was looking actually for Southern Maryland, so I didn't know. So I kind of got confused and frustrated by seeing these things. And then when I got these recruiters sending me in-mails, I was excited. I'm always willing to, partner up with recruiters, partner up with sourcers, chat, talk, all over the country, all over the world. Actually, I've got friends pretty much everywhere. And I started to notice that these sourcers and recruiters were doing the same thing as Mr. Web Developer here. Their LinkedIn profile was as though they were looking for a job. Now, it looked good. They told me all the things that they have recruited for in the past or sourced for in the past, where they're at, so on and so forth. But they're not really looking for a job. But in this community now, and in the last few years, I have seen a interesting change, if you will, a flip from candidates who are now looking for jobs. They're seeking out people who work for these communities. They work, let's say, for example, I want to go work for SAIC, or I want to go work for Microsoft, or I'm thinking of Seattle area companies, Amazon, shocker, Redfin, Starbucks. I'm going to look up the source or a recruiter online. I'm going to see who's working for them, and maybe I'm connected to somebody there, and maybe they can help me get in, so I don't have to go through the ATS of death, that big black hole that candidates always love talking about and complaining about, and have been for over 20 years, at least since I've been in the business. So this is what they're doing, and then they look you up, and it's like, okay, well, or you source somebody and you send them an email. They're going to look you up and make sure you're real. Make sure you're not a spammer, and nothing against my pals in India or Pakistan, but that you're actually really are working for that company, that you really are a person, because scams have becoming more and more prevalent. Jerry Crispin actually wrote an interesting post just a few days ago about 2 websites that were, asking for pertinent information from people and trying to steal people's IDs and get social security numbers, all kinds of crazy stuff out there. So people are becoming more and more prevalent to look it up. So I came up with what I call the awesome LinkedIn profile. Now this is a little bit older presentation, but I like to use it because 1, I'm lazy, and 2, I just thought it came up pretty decent. And I'm really not very good at PowerPoints and things like that. I'm good at writing, but for some reason, not so much an artist. I'm not Picasso. I'm more Hemingway. So this is when I was a senior recruiting lead at ComScore. We were a full desk. So I was doing half my time was sourcing, half my time was recruiting, and the other half of my time was doing paperwork. Yes, I know that sounds kind of silly, but it really is when you are a full desk sourcing recruiter. So what I did is I decided I wanted people to know what I was looking for and almost do my own advertising, as opposed to doing putting up jobs and this is what we're looking for and can you fit this role. I said, this is what I'm looking for. I'm currently searching for data analysts, which I was. That was my big thing in campaign analysts in Western Virginia and New York City, New York at the time. I'm also looking for campaign analysts in Chicago and a director of custom insight solutions in Menlo Park, California. So I was saying, check out our website for more information and to apply. And I do try to answer all respondents as quickly as possible. So do know we try very hard not to be a black hole. And I've always grew up with, I grew up in agency recruiting. And one of my bosses had a great line. He says, say what you say you're going to do when you say you're going to do it with expected results. And so that's what I did. I said, listen, and I did. I literally took about 30 minutes of my day, and I wasn't getting hundreds of applications through LinkedIn. I wasn't having tons of people sending me IMs or emails, but I had a fair amount. And the ones that I didn't really have any interest in, I had a pre-written thank you email directed to them. I personalized it a little bit. It took me maybe 30 seconds, cut, paste, personalize, and then send, and I would send it out. The nice thing was the people that I did want to talk to, I'm like, hey, wow, once again, pre-scripted email, said, let's talk further. Can you get me an email? Please apply online because that makes you an applicant, and that, by legal stance, I can start talking to you. Or if you're going to be lazy, but I really want to talk to you, send me the resume, I'll drop it in, but I still going to need you to apply. And if we move forward, I'll get you an application if you're going to come in and interview with us. And it turned out with my experiment within the first 6 months, my increased response rate was insane. And the best part is people who I couldn't necessarily use, but that were still very interested in ComScore, that were maybe more on the IT side or sales side, so on and so forth. I was able to use those people, send them out to those particular recruiters, and they were getting hires as well. So I was building up a whole group of individuals by just being human, by communicating. And no, I'm not really in sourcing and recruiting as much as I was. I'm now a practitioner with Engaged Talent, but and on the software side. But this is something that I really have preached for a very long time now, for the last couple of years. And I have had sourcers and recruiters respond back to me saying, wow, this was really, really cool. And they were very appreciative of it. Now, the next thing I'm going to talk about, and since I said I'm a writer, and thank you for that, I am a poet. I have 2 books published. They're on Amazon if you're interested, into short stories and non-recruiting stuff. It's kind of fun. But also, I started building a rapport, and I actually wrote something for SourceCon a while back called The Great Experiment You Didn't Know You Were Part of, But Really Were. Every day, usually between the hours of 3 and, I think it was 3 and 5, then it was 4 to 6, and I think it was better at 4 to 6, for a year, I would take a quote. Nothing to do about sourcing, nothing to do about recruiting, just a cool, funny quote from interesting people that I've always appreciated reading. Charles Bukowski, T.S. Eliot. Sometimes I would take just kind of funny stuff from Stephen Wright. And it was spectacular, the amount of people that clicked on to what I wrote. And I was just blown away. Sometimes it was maybe 100 people, and then I'm not kidding when I say sometimes it was 10,000. That's 10,000 people are reading something that I'm saying, and now my name and the idea that I'm a recruiter or a sourcer is now in their heads. And when they get to the point of like, this guy's really funny, and these are interesting points that I made, and it was never political. It was always something funny or something that made people think. Hey, sometimes it was personal. Sometimes I just said, this is the way I'm feeling, and let's maybe believe there's good in the world. One of the best posts I ever had was that. I said, believe there is good in the world. That's all I wrote. 14,000 views, 78 likes, and over 100 responses. People just were like, thank you. That's amazing to me, because all of a sudden, I'm talking to candidates who I've never talked to before. I sourced them off of different platforms. And so many of them wrote back to me in their emails saying, by the way, love your posts on LinkedIn. You're funny and thoughtful. It's the humanization once again. I have also, if you're not writing blogs, that's cool. But if you want to, start out with recruiting blogs under the Recruiting Daily banner. Anybody can put a blog up there. It's a great little community. It doesn't have to be more than a couple of 100 words. Most blogs shouldn't be longer than 600. Twitter is another one that I was using, building up a Twitter follower. And if you're sourcing off of Twitter, this is a great way to get it, because on Twitter, I would put on things like, for data analysts, I would put up all kinds of data analyst stuff, articles that I was reading, new things about Tableau or R, or the latest version of Python was out or something like that, or a cool Python code. And all of a sudden, I had more and more data analysts following me. Now, not necessarily they're interested in jobs quite yet, but we always hear about this pipeline thing. Well, that was the pipeline right there. That was it. They were like, maybe 30 days, maybe 60 days, maybe 90 days. They get back to me, and all of a sudden, it's like, hey, by the way, I really love following you on Twitter because you write up some very interesting articles. And I thought, wow, you really kind of know what you're sourcing for, you know what you're recruiting for. And that's kind of important, because it's beginning a layer of trust. I've also written for ERE Media, SourceCon, Recruiting Daily. I'm hoping some of you have read some of my stuff. I was just at a conference yesterday, and it was really interesting to me for complete strangers to come up and say hi, and they know me from that. Now, granted, that's our own community in those top 3, but once again, that helps because people are always willing to talk to me, jump in, so on and so forth. Sorry about that flash. Can never figure this out. So, cool story, bro. Now just do it. That's what it is, the dude. That's what I'm not kind of known for. Long hair and Van Dyke. No more drinking for me, but I just always loved this picture. So bartenders as recruiters, how many of you that are online, you probably can't say it because you're all muted, but think about this for a second. Do you have a favorite watering hole in Seattle? Do you have a favorite restaurant, a favorite diner that you like to go to for lunch? And is it located close to, let's, not pick on anybody in particular, but let's just say Amazon, because I mean, come on, they're huge there. Not Microsoft anymore, they're in Redmond, but there's these places that you can go to, and when you walk in, you automatically know that these are IT folk, for example, or these are people that work in the community, work in the neighborhood, and they're their local haunt, and they go in, and that's where they go. They hang out there. So my story is really quick. I wrote this piece a long time ago about this young lady named Lily back in the day in Phoenix, and I had a customer as a third party who would hire anybody at Intel. He loved IT folks from Intel, especially web developers. It was just his thing. And anytime I would bring him somebody from Intel with solid experience in web development technologies, specifically JavaScript and back in ASP.NET at that time, and some Perl, believe it or not, he really loved that stuff with an HTML front end, some cascading style sheets, so on and so forth. And I met this young lady named Lily that worked at a bar called Alcatraz. It was a theme bar, and it was early to mid 90s, and theme bars were really big. And she was a lovely human being. She knew how to work a bar. She was very, very attractive, and she was also very, very personable. And a lot of guys would come in right down the street from Intel, and they'd come to see Lily. You can get a drink anywhere, but they came to see Lily. They wanted to hang out with Lily. They knew they didn't have a shot with her, but guys can dream about things like that. And she just was a very cool person to chat with. I witnessed this, and I came into the bar one day saying, wow, I see all these green badges. I see all these blue badges, which are Intel people. And I have a stack of cards. And I'm like, I am like the hunter. I'm going to give everybody my card. They're all going to love me. And guess what happened? Not one person wanted to talk to me. I had people tell me to bugger off. And I just sat there kind of dejected. Lily came up and we started talking, and I realized something. They don't want to talk to me. They want to talk to Lily. So I went back to the office the next day, and I wrote up a terminology sheet and explained what these things were. And I came back to Lily and I said, Lily, I want to see if you would like to be an advocate for me. And she didn't understand that. So I said, but this is what I mean. Here's my cards. I want you to put your name on the back of it. If you hear people saying, man, I can't work at Intel anymore, or I'm just done, or I'm looking for probably a new position, and you overhear these conversations as these people are talking with each other, I want you to just very nicely hand them my card and say, hey, I've got a pal of mine who's a recruiter who always loves talking to IT people. Give him an email or give him a call and tell him Lily sent you. And she's like, well, okay. And I said, now, for every person that gets hired, I'll give you $500. And she just looked at me like, what? I'm like, yeah. I said, for every person that gets hired and they're there for a minimum of 30 days, I'll give you $500 as a referral fee. And she's like, that's more than I make on a Friday night in tips. And I'm like, yeah, I got it. So I'm all excited. Once again, I'm a very excitable person, and I always try to think on the positive. I like to see the sunny side of life. And if you get that quote, then you're somebody I really like. And so a week went by, nothing. And then another week went by, and then nothing. And then I realized it's yet another failed experiment, but it didn't really cost me anything. And thank God it didn't, because my boss really hadn't signed off on it. Then all of a sudden, I think I went into the third or fourth week, and then resumes started coming in, and the subject line said, Lily told me to email you. And I started getting resumes. And it turns out that the Web Tiger team at Intel had finished its job, and a number of the people that were there were not going to get reassigned. They were contractors, so their contract was up, and it's like, thanks and nice to know you. Here's your final check and out the door. And they were, Lily found out and started handing out my cards. I started talking to these guys, and out of 7 people that I got that were really solid, 6 got jobs. That's $3,000. So I went to my boss and said, so here's the deal. I told him the whole story that I just told you. He didn't actually believe me. It's not that he didn't trust me. This was so out of left field. He didn't really get it. So he went over to petty cash. He got $3,000 in cash. He said, you fly, I'm going to buy. He says, we're going to go get a drink over at this bar. I want to meet this Lily person. And I'm like, okay, awesome. That's even better. I'd love for you to meet her. So he went in, Lily sees me, waves, and I said, when are you getting off? She says, in about 10 minutes. I said, well, I got something for you. And she got this big smile. She comes running over after she cashes out and does her shift, and introduces herself to my boss, Kurt, at the time. And she sits down, and I just hand her, I just push slide across the bar that envelope, a very thick envelope of $3,000. And she opened up the envelope, and I mean, she started to cry. She's like, I've never seen this much money in my life in one setting in cash. And I said, there's more where that comes from. I think we've got a really good gig. Within 10 minutes, my boss is trying to recruit her to come become a recruiter for us and to be a salesperson. He's so excited. This is insane. She then, of course, broke both of our hearts by telling her that her boyfriend was in the Navy and they were moving to San Diego, and I never did get to see Lily again. However, I did start to go to different area bars and some restaurants, but predominantly bars around Intel and around a couple of other places, and started doing the same thing with my boss's blessing. As I was sourcing recruiting over the years, especially in the IT field in cleared recruiting, I started doing this in the Reston area, the DC area, so on and so forth. It's hard to find people with high levels of clearance. They're very purple squirrelish. And I started doing the same technique. Now, however, I didn't have the kind of cash flow that I did when I was working as a third-party recruiter. So I switched it up and said, I would take him to dinner. I'd slip him an extra 20 or an extra 30. And most people didn't really care. They didn't understand it. But it worked out pretty great for me, and it might be able to work out for you. So just give it a thought. And it doesn't have to just be a female bartender, by the way. It's one of my best bartenders was this really great guy, an older guy that just everybody opened up to. And he and I are still actually good friends. He misses me that I'm not in DC anymore, but we still talk. He's a great guy, still at the same bar too. So, anybody know what a fishbowl looks like, or I've ever seen this in a counter before? This is kind of an old school marketing technique that restaurants, specifically diners, would used to do. Most of them were like lunch counter type places, and the idea was you dropped your business card into the bowl, and every week the manager would dip his hand in or her hand in and grab a card. And then you would get a phone call saying, hey, congratulations from Nick's Diner. You get a free lunch next week. Just come in and your name's on the list, and you get a free lunch. Now, what does this mean for the diner? Most people don't want to eat lunch by themselves. They want to eat lunch with a friend or friends. So they're like, hey, listen, I got a free lunch, so let's go over to Nick's Diner. And they grab 2 or 3 people. So now Nick gets 2 or 3 extra people for the price of $8 out the door, but he's making that person, Nick's Diner is now making extra money because that person brings their friends and they get lunch too. So I started talking to Nick at Nick's Diner back in Phoenix, and these are all old school stories. And I asked Nick, I said, yeah, you got a ton of cards in there from mostly Wells Fargo people. And my client happened to be at the time Bank One, which is now Bank of America. And I said, what do you do with all the cards that you don't use? And he, Nick just kind of shrugged his shoulders and said, I throw them away. And I'm like, oh. I said, can I have them? And Nick looked at me and goes, what do you want the cards for? I'm like, well, I'd like to build a database and call people and see if they'd be interested in coming to work for my client. He wasn't too keen on that. He says, I don't really want you bothering my customers because if they feel that way, they're not going to put the card in the bowl. So I'm not good on that. I said, but how about this, Nick? I said, I'll pay for the lunch every week. I'll give you $20, $20 for the bowl of cards. So now it's not costing you anything. Now, instead of getting only 3 lunches that are paid for, now you're getting 4 because I'm paying for the 4th one. And Nick shrugged his shoulders again and said, all right, maybe. And I said, listen, I'll also make sure that when I contact these people, I will not let them know that it came from a business card bowl. I'll just say that it was referred by an anonymous friend of theirs who wanted to remain anonymous, which happens to be you, Nick. Nick said, okay. So at the time I had a receptionist up front, and when I went to her and we went through the cards, and I said, would you mind helping me out? And she's like, yeah, I got nothing better to do right now. And so we built a spreadsheet, and we started collating the cards. And what are on business cards? Phone numbers, email addresses, and the best, titles, systems administrator, DBA, marketing person, salesperson, finance, account payable, accounts receivable, all kinds of stuff. So we built a list. The ones that I could use, I kept, and the ones I couldn't, we didn't. Put them on the spreadsheet. And then eventually, as we started to find out that the same people would go to the same diners, we'd get new cards, But we built up a pretty decent database, and we just started, sourcing, started calling people, started sending emails and making placements. And it cost me, $20 a week, and I was making great money off of it. This can happen anytime. In fact, if they don't have a business card bowl at some of the places I would go to, I'd bring my own. And I'd tell the manager the same thing, or the owner the same thing. And eventually, for basically $100 out a week out of pocket, I was making a lot of money. Now, I know these are third-party issues, but for sometimes you go to your manager, you never know. Out of the box thinking, for $100 a week, as opposed to what you're paying for some of the software that companies that are out there are charging $30,000, $40,000 a year, this is a little bit cheaper. Just saying. That's it, guys. It's not a super long one. This is me. At Dare Diver. I'm at LinkedIn.com. That's my LinkedIn profile. If you want to connect, I'd love to see you. That's my Facebook. I am kind of particular about what I do on Facebook, but I try to lock in to people. I'm more on the LinkedIn side, or you can tweet at me, or my email's down below, and that should be darediver@outlook.com. Hotmail does work. Like I said, this is a little bit older slide systems. And the Amazon.com is where my books are if you're interested in looking into that as well. And that's it. So do we have any questions? Sound of silence. Is anybody there?
Folks, you can speak up. We're taking questions.
So I told you there's going to be a lot of questions. This is more of informative than anything.
So we do have a question from Susanna asking, how did you get into recruiting?
Great question. Funny thing, that was one of the first things I ever wrote. Matt Charney asked me about that once. It's like, how did you get into recruiting, and why are you still in recruiting? So the story really goes as this. I was living in Phoenix and barely making ends meet in sales, actually, and taking care of my great uncle. And one of my oldest friends from grade school is Mensa Smart and was doing Y2K testing. This was 1997. And he just got really bored, and he kind of backed into recruiting, being not so much a recruiter at the time, because we didn't have sourcing back then. Sourcing was recruiting, recruiting was sourcing. We didn't have an actual titled sourcer. And he was taking out resumes and doing technology interviews with individuals for the recruiters who didn't know anything about technology predominantly. And he didn't like that either. So he decided to move on. And we were shooting pool one afternoon, and he's like, people like talking to you, and you like talking to people. Like, you're always on the phone and you're always chatty. And he's like, you would be really good at this job. And I didn't understand what he was talking about. And then he brought up technology, and I'm like, technology? I barely know. My computer's a word processor for me. I mean, I write things on it. I just discovered email at that point. And I just laughed. And it was a very small shop at the time. It doesn't exist anymore, unfortunately, in Phoenix. But it was a 4-person shop. It was Spartacus Staffing. And went in, met with the crew there, and they took a shot at me. They liked the one guy was from Philadelphia. I'll never forget him. And he's just like, he goes, the guy's got moxie. He goes, you can't sell that. You can't teach that. I can teach you everything else. So my buddy came in he spent a week with me, just running me through the program and the process, and taught me a little bit about technology. And my first month, I placed a C programmer on a Unix platform for a company called PCS Pharmaceuticals. And the company Spartacus had been trying to place somebody there for over a year and never got any success in it. And I was able to place somebody there in the first 30 days. And my boss at the time came to me and said, you were born to be a recruiter. So there you go. I was off and running with the races. And what I ended up doing was spending time, like my Saturdays. I'm just kind of that weird guy. On Saturdays, I would go to the office because it was quiet, and I started really digging into the internet, and I started learning about, I just started learning kind of about Boolean, but more about, I found websites like whatis.com that's still out there. And I started teaching myself about technologies. And back then it was VB5 and Visual Basic 6, C Sharp, ASP, a lot of that stuff hadn't even come out yet. I was learning about VAX VMS and JCL, which were all mainframe languages, and COBOL, COBOL 2, Red Brick. These were all things that our customers were doing. So I went through and realized, okay, so this fits with this block fits with that. So that when I talked with technology people, I came across knowing what I was talking about, which was a little bit different than most recruiters at that point. And unfortunately to this day, for a lot of our recruiters in the technology world as well. And because that's what you want to do. You want to learn the knowledge. You want to have that knowledge to know who you're talking to, why you're talking to them, and make them comfortable to know that you're not wasting their time either. So yeah, it was great. Did third-party recruiting for a number of years, and then got into the corporate world, and it's been a great ride.
Do we have other questions for Derek? Folks, don't be shy. Speak
Come
up.
on, you're recruiters and sorcerers, for goodness sake. Say something.
Yeah, most of this assembled group are not wallflowers. They're happy to speak up.
Well, I would just like to say that I thought those were great stories and great ideas in terms of the sourcing and establishing the contact at the bar. Very creative.
I think I think that we out of the box thinking. I was sitting at a conference, I think it was like 2 years ago, and I was sitting in the back, and I think I got into the main hall a little late for whatever reason, and I was sitting in the back, and I looked around, and everybody had a computer open. Like, and I'm not kidding when I say everybody. I mean, like the power meter must have been like going around in a circle as though it was a stopwatch. I mean, just like, but on speed, because there was so much power being sucked. Like every power strip was full, and all I saw was the glowing lights of all of these computers. And then it dawned on me one day. I said, if the internet went down, if we had an EMP and it just wiped out the internet, it just wiped out everything, 95% of the people in that room would quit recruiting and sourcing, because that's all they do. They sit on the internet. I remember one of the first things I did when we had internet, Monster had just started, and we basically recruited directly out of our main database, and was on the phone all day long. I didn't send emails. I made phone calls. I was
recruiting at that time, and I remember that. And I remember a search engine called Alta Vista.
Oh yeah. I remember Alta Vista.
That was my main source. Long time ago.
It's crazy though. People are so afraid of the phone now. And an article came out that just said that, like, the Generation Z, I guess is the next generation, doesn't even do email anymore. They do texting, Snapchat, Twitter. They don't do email. They check their email to see if their school sent them something or a school project. But other than that, they don't do email. They don't have emails.
Right.
And that really kind of blew me away. So you have to kind of, as Glenn Cathy once said, if you're going to go fishing, you got to go fish where the fish are, and you have to kind of use the same bait and lures that they're going to want to use themselves. And that's what's the shiny object that's going to attract them. So anytime, if you're all you're doing is just sending out email after email after email and wondering why you're not getting a decent response, it's because that's not the way people are talking anymore.
Sure.
Aside
from LinkedIn, do you have any other advice for recruiters working remotely? I just started with Search Wizards, and I'm working from the Dallas area, and I'll be sourcing in, the LA, Seattle, San Francisco area. Any advice off the top of your head, or?
One of the little tools, this is kind of one of those little nuggets that most people kind of pass by. The whole post and pray thing is always entertaining to me, because people are like, "Oh, it's post and pray," and I'm never getting anything. You probably are. You just don't know what you're looking at. One of the great things about specifically the areas of, and I live in Portland. Here's a great story in Seattle and San Francisco is, and if it's IT, I'm going to assume it's IT people you're looking for.
Yes.
Okay.
Well, it's people that recruit IT people. Yes.
Okay.
IT recruiters.
Oh yeah. Okay. Ooh, so you're looking for IT recruiters? One of the places to go is going to be Facebook, Twitter. Another great place that, well, for recruiters, it's a little bit more difficult. I've not really recruited recruiters, unfortunately. I would go and LinkedIn's obviously a given. Facebook might be another place to go, or Twitter, and target specific companies. Boy, that's a tough one for me because, like I said, I'm not really big on recruiters. I've always been IT. One of my great things was always I used to spend $25 and put a post on Craigslist, and I would find some of the best programmers I ever got because they're always looking for side projects. They're always interested in new things, new technologies.
Good idea.
For recruiting side too, you can always set up what's called a honeypot. So what I would do is, since recruiters are recruiting for people, there's I can't remember her name. I met her at Talent 42 in Seattle a few years ago. She was speaking. She wrote what's called a honeypot. A honeypot it's sort of like a trap. So she wrote a fake profile on LinkedIn to be a JavaScript developer, and she sat because she was looking for recruiters herself, and she one of the best recruiters that she could get. So she set up this really phenomenal fake JavaScript profile in San Francisco, and recruiters just flocked to her, and she would only contact the ones that came up with the most creative way to reach out to her. So if they just spammed her and they just sent her a really just like a blah email, then she would just pass them. But if they were really eccentric or did something very clever, she'd reach back out to them and say, hey, listen, I get that you're looking for JavaScript developers, but I personally am looking for recruiters, and I found what you did very enticing. And she ended up building a really great team by doing that. So that might be something you want to look at.
Yeah, great idea. Thank you.
You bet.
Derek, I'll be so bold to ask a question myself, which is precedent setting. Social media has obviously changed so much in the last 10 years. If you get out your crystal ball, can you kind of project where we might be at, say, 10 years from now as far as social media and marketing strategies to utilize it in the recruiting realm?
Ooh, that's interesting. The one thing I'm starting to see is people kind of are pulling away from what we call traditional social media. I think like I look at my niece, for example, who's in her early 20s. She doesn't really spend any time on Facebook. She's more on Instagram now. It's fast. She's on Snapchat, Instagram. She does Twitter to a certain degree. She's not on LinkedIn. She doesn't have a LinkedIn profile. Doesn't see any reason to have one. So she has a Facebook profile, but she doesn't really put much stuff up there. It's always going to be the newest, greatest thing. I mean, back in the day, there was before Facebook, there was MySpace. Everybody had a MySpace page, and everybody just kind of navigates to the next big thing. There's a thing out of San Francisco that's it's a pure mobile app called Hype, HYPE. It's another photo app, sort of like Instagram, except it's more based upon places, food, music, literature, and you take pictures of things. You tell the person, like I use it a lot for because I'm kind of a foodie as well on the side. So whenever I go to a new restaurant, I'll take a picture of the dish if I think it's really good, or if I ate it, or I take a little bite and I'm like, wow, this is delicious. I'll put on there, hey, I'm at Milo's Cafe in Portland, Oregon, having this fantastic salmon eggs Benedict, with coffee, and I'll write a little notation about it, and it forces you to do all those things. And I've got, and I don't know why, but I think I've got like 4,800, 5,000 followers on Hype. And I get all these likes and so on and so forth. I haven't really played from a recruiting standpoint, but I'm not really doing that anymore. But it's an interesting tool to maybe look at to do that. I don't know. I know a lot of people are starting to pull off of Facebook because it's becoming it's polarized. It's all about politics now. It's almost hard. It's almost hard for me to go on anymore. I go on to my groups that I go on to, my recruiting groups, like Recruiters Who Make Placements or Recruiters Online, SourceCons, Secret Sourcing Group, things like that, to chat with peers and discuss strategies and things like that. But 10 years from now, I'm excited to see. I don't know. I mean, 10 years from now, I'm hopefully going to be retired and sitting in an island outside of Jamaica. So.
Hey, Derek, this is Melissa Clementi. I just have a question to kind of piggyback on what you were saying. And by the way, you're an amazing storyteller. We could probably all listen to you tell stories all day.
Oh, thank you.
So that truly is a gift for you. We appreciate it. But I'm just curious because I agree. Like, I think that trying to determine what to post sometimes just to get people interested, especially from a recruiting perspective, I'm just curious as to how you went about. Did you have like a certain strategy, or did you really just try to focus on posting things that were upbeat and funny? And, how did you come up with different ideas to, post different content and keep people interested? And I think you had mentioned one of the things you posted, you had like 14,000 views or something like that. So I was just curious.
I'm trying to remember. I had it, and I just got unfortunately way too busy. I was going to toss it in here as a slide. I just said, I think I just put in something like, today I'm going to go do something for somebody else. And it wasn't about recruiting, wasn't about sourcing, wasn't about anything. It just said, I'm going to go help a person that needs help. I'm going to turn off my TV. I'm going to turn off my computer. I'm going to even turn off the radio. I'm just going to read a good book. And I'm just going to go out and be a source of good in the world today. And I'm going to hopefully carry that throughout. And it just took off. Another one, I wrote a story about homeless and hiring. And wow, did I get just an amazing response from people. Some that are actually homeless, some that are literally living in a shelter with computer access at the library that took the time. That was crazy. I'm trying to think of what else. Joe Weech wrote a whole piece on age discrimination. Joe is as an older woman. She's got a ton of experience, and she spent a year looking for a job because she's 57 years old. And frankly, nobody would hire her. And age discrimination in the state of California is now the #1 complaint of all discrimination lawsuits in the state. It's a real thing. It's just not discussed. And she put up this really beautiful post about her journey. She got like 100,000 views. She's been interviewed. She got emails. She got all these things. And within 3 weeks, she had like 4 job offers.
That's awesome.
I think the problem is that we, it's the whole thing that we used to say in the early 2000s, fake it until you make it kind of thing. I think people are tired of it. I think people are tired of fake.
Right.
I think people are tired of the Kardashian thought process anymore. It's just not, it's not cool. I think, when you're real, I think people freak. I think they go, wow, that's brave. And it shouldn't be brave. It should be the way everybody should be. I mean, that's my feeling. I've had a lot of people tell me that over the years. They're like, I am not afraid to cry. I think that's, I'm not, I'm not afraid to cry. I've done it publicly. I've had Rob McIntosh gave me one of the most beautiful compliments ever. He said, dude, when you talk, you just you suck everybody in because what you're saying is real. There's emotion there. And I think we have less. I think we try to guard ourselves so much, and we don't want to show emotion because we think that shows weakness. And I think that's our main problem in society, is that we don't let some of that emotion out, and we bottle it up until we blow up. And that's just sad.
Right. I agree. Thank you so much for sharing. That's awesome.
Thank you. really enjoyed talking with everybody, and thanks for listening and listening in. And once again, I am always open for questions. Like I left this particular slide up so people can either screenshot it, or I guess you probably send it a deck or something like that as well. But feel free to reach out with me anytime. I might not get back to you right away. It may take me some time because I do work. I do have a job, but I do try to respond to people and chat with people privately. I know there's a lot of people that are afraid to ask questions live on these types of things and things like that. But and I'm always willing to help you and direct you into. And if I don't know the answer, I'll direct you to somebody who I think might. Or I'll just tell you, I just don't know. I mean, I'm not a guru. I'm not a thought leader. I'm just a guy who's been doing this for 22 years. So, if you want to lean on me, lean on me.
Derek, we also had many people who wanted to join us today who had conflicts with work, obviously.
Of course,
and we will be sending this recording out, so you can probably expect that will generate some private questions to you, and it will invite people to reach out to you on their own after they view the recording.
Awesome.
Does anybody else have a question they'd like to get in before we let Derek go and let everybody get back to their daily routine there? As an auctioneer, I feel like saying going once.
Going twice.
Going twice. Well, Derek, thank you for your time. Everybody else, thank you for joining us today. And I hope everybody has a great rest of their day and week and a wonderful Thanksgiving holiday to come if you are here in the U.S. and observe that. And
Absolutely.
Derek, thanks again for taking time, especially while you're out on the road there in California. We appreciate having you.
Thank you. And let me just say at the end, for everybody out there who's listening, do good and be kind. And thank you.
Well said. Thanks, everybody.
Take care.
Thank you.